Assalamualaikum and good afternoon. This is still in Module 5 on thesis and paper writing. This is part 2 of the module where I'm going to talk about how to write introduction and literature review chapter. In chapter 1, normally it is the introduction chapter. There are a number of components that can be written in chapter 1. 1. Introduction. This is general statements about your field of research. It gives context to people who read your thesis about the general field of research and why it is important. First, chapter 1, which is the introduction chapter. It has a number of components. 1. Introduction. This is general statement about your field of research, especially for people who do not work specifically in the field of research. You give context to the people or the reader about the field where you do your research. The second part is the background of the problem. This is where you indicate the root of the problem, why it happens, and what people have done to solve the problem and why it is not enough. Part 3 is where you give your problem statement. It describes the issue that is in need of study and what you propose to solve the problem or the issue that you have outlined in the background of the problem. You explain in more detail how you think that problem can be solved and why, or give the justification for the proposed method or approach to the problem. Part 4 is the purpose of the research. This is where you outline the aim and goal of your research. Part 5 is the objectives of your research. This is in more detailed form what you need to do to answer the overall aim and goal of your research. First, chapter 1 or the introduction chapter. It has a number of components. 1 is introduction, which is the general statements about your field of research. This gives context to the work that you are doing. 2, the background of the problem. This is where you explain the problem that you want to solve and what other people have done to solve the problem. 3, statement of the problem. This is where you describe the issue in more detail and what you propose to solve the problem or how you are going to address the issue. Please give justification here in the statement of the problem. Part 4 is the purpose of the research. This is the overall aim or goal of your research. Part 5 is the objectives. This is specific objectives that you will accomplish to achieve the overall aim or goal outlined in part 4. Normally, part 5, the objectives are more detailed, and if the objectives are achieved, you can achieve the overall goal of your research. Part 6 is the scope and key assumptions of your study. This is where you explain the boundary, the limits, and the extent of your study. Part 7 is the importance of the research. This is where you justify or explain why your research is significant or worth doing. Part 8, you might want to give definition of terms so that people understand the concepts that you are going to use in the research. Part 9 is the research contribution. This is the value or impact of your study. You convince people why it is important to do the research and what your research will contribute. It is directly related to part 7. Part 10 is the organization of the thesis. If you are doing this chapter for your proposal, you might explain the organization of the proposal from chapter 1, 2, 3, and 4. If you have finished writing up the whole thesis, then you might want to explain the organization of the thesis. What is chapter 1, 2, until the last chapter in your thesis. First, the introduction part. In the introduction of chapter 1, normally is labeled 1.0. You have to give sufficient information or background to allow the readers to understand the context and significance of the questions that you are trying to address. You have to simplify the problem. Take a broader view of the problem, the helicopter view, and how what you are going to do fit the overall broader world of the discipline. Do not overestimate. Imagine you are writing for the researchers in the general area. You understand that not all of these researchers understand or are specialists in your particular topic. So you are writing for the benefit of researchers in the general area of your research. Try to make the introduction interesting, because if you bore the reader here at the beginning, you are unlikely to revive the reader's interest in the material and method section or the rest of your thesis. This is where you can be less dry. If you want to wax lyrical about your topic, here is the place to do it. You can quote articles from newspaper to give the reader understanding of why the topic is interesting and worth doing. You might want to go to the library and read several thesis introductions. Some of the introductions are very good, and you can try to write like those introductions, and try not to write introductions that you think is, try not to write introductions similar to introductions that you think is boring and can bore readers. You can ask someone who is not specialist in your area to read the introduction after you have written it and comment on it. Is it adequate? Is it easy to follow? Their comments, use their comments to improve the introduction. This, you might want to revise the introduction at the end of your thesis, because the introduction should tell where the thesis is going, and it can become clearer during the writing or at the end of the thesis, because the introduction part in the thesis have to tie with the conclusion part in your conclusion or final. Next part is the problem background. In this section, you explain about the problem, where it comes from, why the problem is important, what other researchers have already known about the problem, what other researchers have tried, what methods they use to solve the problem, and how are the results. Maybe there are a number of problems to lead to your particular objectives or research questions. Maybe you talk about, not only you talk about the problem in specific and what other people have done, to understand the gap or the knowledge gap in the problem, or what else need to be solved, or maybe the current solution is not very accurate or not perfect. So you have to also explain other ways that can be used to study the problems, what other aspects of the problems have not been studied, or maybe there are other techniques that have been applied in other domains that can potentially be applied to this problem to solve it better. Here, you think of other alternatives that can be used to solve the problem. Of course, we do not know whether these other alternatives will work better than the existing solution or not. That is why we need to do the research. If we 100% know that the solution will give better results than the existing solution, then it is called trivial and we do not need to do research. Here you just have to justify why you think other approaches or alternative to solving the problem can work better than the current solution. The next section is the research objectives. This stem from the research background. In the research background, you have discussed about the problem, what other people have done, why is it not adequate, or maybe there are other alternatives to study the problem. So from that background, you state your objective. The objectives must be suitable and adequate in terms of the novelty and depth, meaning that your objective must contain something new that hasn't been tried to solve the problem, and it must have the required depth suitable for PhD or masters. It must have the required characteristics to be considered a scientific investigation. You must have a systematic plan to actually solve or achieve the objective. And the hypothesis and objectives must be formulated appropriately, correctly, and clearly for people to understand what is the objectives of your research. In research objective, there are two parts. One is the research aim or research goal. Research aim or goal is a single overall statement of the purpose, which may be expressed as a research question or a problem statement. The objectives describe a series of tasks which, if you complete them all, would enable the aim or the goal of the research to be met. Objectives tell us what we are going to do to achieve the overall research aim. We might pose, apart from the research aim and objective, the research questions or hypotheses. Answers to the research question and hypothesis are the information obtained from conducting the research. Formulation of research questions and hypotheses inform data collection and study design necessary to obtain reliable information to understand the underlying cause of the problem of concern. Back to our research objective. It must have the SMART criteria or SMART characteristics. One, what is meant by SMART characteristics? S means specific. The objective must be precisely defined, unambiguous, and can deliver a specific component of the final PhD. For example, rather than you say to design a machine learning algorithm to solve a particular problem, you might want to state the specific machine learning algorithm that you want to use. For example, you want to say that you want to design a convolutional neural network approach to solve a particular problem. The second criteria is measurable, meaning that we must have a way to measure that our objective have been achieved or not. In the case of quantitative research, there must be a quantitative method to determine if the progress towards the objective is being specifically achieved or not. The third criteria of your objective is agreed upon, meaning that all the objectives must be components of an achievable whole, meaning that it must be related to one another so that when we achieve all the objectives, we actually achieve the overall goal or aim of the research. The fourth criteria of a good PhD objective is realistic. We must write the objective specific enough in such a way that we can estimate the amount of time needed to achieve the objective and also the resources needed, knowledge and skill needed to complete the objective. A good objective is realistic, meaning that it is achievable within the limitations of resources, knowledge, and time that we have. The fifth criteria of SMART PhD objectives are time-bound, meaning that we can estimate the amount of time needed to complete the objective or to achieve the objective, because we have deadline to complete the PhD objectives or the master's objectives. So when we say it is time-bound, we can estimate the amount of time that we need to complete the objective, and we can complete it within the duration allocated for the PhD or master's studies. Let me elaborate the SMART acronym in further details. One, how do you develop specific research objectives? Research objectives are directly related to research questions. You might want to start with very general objective or research question. For example, are older people less likely to use the internet than younger people? There are things that are not really specific about this research question. For example, older person. What is meant by older person? To a teenager, a person like me may seem very old. But to me, an older person might be at least 65 or 70 years of age. So we need to define the groups that we want to investigate here in more specific. And we also might want to consider other factors that may conflict with the variable under investigation, in this case, age. And we might want to check when we say, are older person less likely to use the internet than younger people? Maybe internet usage is not very meaningful. Can we measure internet usage? In the original research question, we also talked about internet usage. How can we measure the effect of internet usage in a more meaningful and robust way? We have to think about what the answer to this research question can contribute. Maybe it is more useful to investigate what barriers exist for the different age group in using the internet. So we might want to make the research objectives or research question more specific so that it is actually meaningful and have good contribution to the field or to the world. Objectives also have to be achievable. The research goals must be realistic and attainable. You know the goals are attainable if you are sure that you know how to achieve them and you have the means and capabilities to achieve them. Some really interesting studies simply cannot be done. You may not be able to gain access to the data or subjects that you need due to ethical reasons. Maybe there are not enough cases. Maybe the real-world phenomena evolve too quickly to evaluate the effect of intervention you wish to study, and it may cost too much. So make sure your objectives are achievable and attainable. The research objective also have to be relevant, reasonable, and realistic. Do a PhD research that have relevant benefit to others, not just something you pursue for the sake of completing your PhD. And you must make sure that the aim is adequate for a thesis to make an incremental contribution to knowledge and understanding. A PhD does not have to inspire a revolution in thinking about a research discipline, but it must have contribution and it must be realistic. PhD is 3 years of solid work, not to achieve a Nobel Prize. In the next part, you should also explain guide to the thesis. For example, chapter 1 contains what, chapter 2 include what, chapter 3 include what, and so on. So that is the guide to the thesis so that people understand what is to be expected from each chapter that will follow chapter 1. The next chapter following chapter 1, introduction chapter, is chapter 2, which is the literature review chapter. The second chapter following the introduction chapter is normally the literature review chapter. This is chapter 2. Chapter 2 should contain the analysis and synthesis of the literature pertaining to your research aim, objective, research question, and hypothesis. You can write about the literature from broad to narrow, and you might want to take into account both the theoretical and empirical issues regarding the problem that you want to study. Here, normally you have to start with the description of the problem area and then the issues that you want to tackle, what people have done regarding the issues, and why is it not enough, and what you propose and why you propose the research that you want to do. So overall, the research or the literature review chapter should not be just descriptive, but it must be evaluative in nature, meaning that you have to discuss the literature so that it leads logically to your research question and what you propose to do in your research. When writing the literature review chapter, you must show how your research is a link in the chain of research that has been developing in the field of study. So we know what people have done and what you will do and how your research fit into the chain of research that have been developing in the area. You must write so that you can demonstrate that you have detailed knowledge of the original sources, you have thorough knowledge in the field, and you understand the main theoretical and methodological issues in the area. Remember again, I emphasize that literature review should be more than a catalogue of research that have been done in the area. It should contain critical analytical approach with an understanding of the sources of error and differences of opinion in the literature. It should be written clearly, succinct, penetrating, and challenging to read. Now, when you write your literature review chapter, you demonstrate that you are the world expert in the narrow topic of your thesis. And make sure you do not omit relevant papers by researchers who are likely to become your examiners or your potential employers. I have mentioned and described about literature review when talking about the module on literature review earlier in the class or in the course. So I just want to emphasize, before we write about the literature review, you should have construct a working thesis statement to support your research aim and objective. Remember, the literature review chapter is supposed to support your research aim, objective, research question, hypothesis, and problem statement. For example, you want to propose a new way to detect intelligent plagiarism by using semantic fuzzy approach or fuzzy semantic approach. So the way you construct the literature review chapter is to support this research objective or to support this research aim, meaning that you have to talk about intelligent plagiarism, how the current techniques to detect plagiarism cannot support or cannot detect some types of intelligent plagiarism, and why you propose semantic and fuzzy approach to solve or tackle this type of intelligent plagiarism. So you actually have a working thesis statement that fuzzy semantic approach can detect plagiarism, can detect intelligent plagiarism better. So you use this focus to construct your thesis statement, and you construct the whole literature review chapter to support your stance, why you choose semantic fuzzy approach to tackle intelligent plagiarism cases. Here you show again, intelligent plagiarism, what people have done in terms of plagiarism detection, how these current approaches to plagiarism detection cannot cater some types of intelligent plagiarism cases, and why you propose semantic and fuzzy technology to address intelligent plagiarism cases. So again, construct a working thesis statement to support your research aim and objective. Use this focus that you have found to construct a thesis statement. So not only your thesis or your research have a thesis statement, but also your literature review, because your thesis statement will argue for a certain position and opinion, and also will argue for a particular perspective on the literature that have been published. You must ensure when you write about literature review, you must ensure that each objective in your chapter 1 is supported. Yeah, for each objective, you have to justify why the problem is important and significant. You have to discuss current solutions to the problem in the chapter, in literature review chapter. Yeah, current solutions to the problem. Discuss why it is, why it is not enough, why the current solutions are not enough. Therefore, the gap, and discuss other possible alternatives to solve the problem. Yeah, and justify why you choose certain solution or certain approach as your hypothesis or as the formulation to solve your problem. So when you write this literature review chapter, people are very convinced that this problem is worth researching. This problem have not been solved to satisfaction. There is a gap and there are other alternatives to approach the problem, and why you choose certain alternative. So the discussion part in the literature review will be summarized and put into your research background. Yeah, remember, the discussion part in the literature review chapter can be summarized and put in the problem background in chapter 1, so that people know that there is a gap. The current research cannot solve the gap up to satisfaction. There is a gap, and why you propose what you propose. Okay, how do you write literature review? Yeah, first you write introduction that give a quick idea about the area. Yeah, the central theme. Yeah, maybe it give context to why the problem, what is the problem, and why the problem is important. Next is the body. This is where you discuss the current sources, yeah, and you organize it either either in chronology or by themes or by different methodology. Maybe you look at significant writings or approaches of classic studies, or you can do inverted pyramid, meaning that from broad to narrow, from general to specific to your area. Yeah. Then you have to discuss what you recommend. Yeah. So what have you found from reviewing the literature so far, and then what is the gap, and then why we should try the things that you want to try or study in your research. Yeah. So this is the meat or the very important part, yeah, of your research or of your literature review chapter, which is the discussion. Yeah. When writing your literature review, you must make sure that you critically examine the literature. You just don't list or describe what you have located or what you have read regarding the research area. You must link the literature to your research question. The literature that is not directly related to your research question should be omitted from this chapter. You must highlight the strengths, weaknesses, and error in the literature regarding the topic that you want to do research, and you must show how your research support and extend the topic or existing knowledge in the area. The relationship between the literature and your research to the literature must be identified and articulated in relation to your field of research. So when you discuss and evaluate the literature review, discuss what other people have done, why is it not enough, what you are going to do, and why you think what you are going to do can solve the problem better and extend the topic or existing knowledge in the area. When people evaluate your literature, there are a number of some sort of grades that they will give. Yeah? What we want is we want to see that the student has extensive knowledge and understanding of the topic. Yeah? When you have your discussion, it shows that you have excellent appreciation of the main issues, benefit and limitations of the approaches that have been published in the literature. And when you want to propose something, what you propose is well reasoned, logical, and you have coherent argument. and your views are supported by a range of references. We want the literature review to have good breadth and depth about the subject matter. We want to make sure that you cover the issues that should be covered. A poor literature review is where the student have poor breadth and depth of the subject matter, have limited coverage of the issues, benefit and limitation of the approach, and the argument or discussion are very weak, and maybe there is no argument at all, very few references to support the argument or the discussion. Yeah. A very poor literature review is a literature review that do not have discussion part to support the research objective, problem statement, or research questions. There are different levels of literature review. What we don't want is you just report what have been published or you just point to the literature. This is very low level and very common. The next level is you show us that you have knowledge about what have been published and you have comprehension or you understand what have been published. But the best is if you can synthesize what have been published in the literature and you discuss it and you discuss new approaches to solve the problem and why you think this new approach might work better than what have been published or tried by other researchers. That is synthesis mastery that we want out of the literature review chapter. When writing the literature review chapter, you just do not present other people's view or argument. It should not be just a catalogue of what have been published regarding your research area, but it should contain critical analytical approach and understanding of sources of error and differences of opinion in the literature. You should present your perspective, position, or standpoint regarding the literature, not only in the literature review chapter, but also in the whole thesis. Your theoretical position is clearly and strongly stated, and your language actually indicate your assessment of the literature. This is what we meant by your voice. You have to make your voice and view of the literature clear, not just presenting what other people have done or just presenting what have been done regarding the work, regarding your what have been done by other researchers regarding the topic or your research area. Next, I'm going to talk about chapter 3, methodology, and also the experimental chapter before we go to conclusion and references and appendix. Thank you.